They sold him a paralyzed maid as a cruel joke. Struggling rancher Jedediah Thorne, a man whose own life felt like a landscape etched by drought and sorrow, a silent testament to dreams eroded by harsh winds and harsher fate, married her that very day. The dust of the long trail from his failing ranch to the squalid settlement of Perdition clung to him like a shroud, a gritty reminder of his solitude and the whispers that followed him like shadows. He was a man hollowed by loss, the ghosts of a wife and child taken by fever years ago still walking the empty rooms of his heart, their laughter a faint, painful echo in the vast silence of the plains. He'd come seeking help, a strong back for meager wages, anything to claw his way back from the precipice. Instead, Perdition offered him its scorn, gift wrapped in the form of a woman. Silas Blackwood, a man whose heart was as barren as the alkali flats surrounding the town, orchestrated the spectacle. His eyes, small and hard as river stones, glinted with malice as he and his snickering cronies, the Gleason brothers, dragged a crude wooden chair into the dusty track before the saloon. In it sat a woman, Ilara, still as a figure carved from pale wood, her eyes downcast, a curtain of dark hair obscuring her face. A coarse blanket covered her from the waist down. "Here why are, Thorne?" Blackwood boomed, his voice thick with false bonhomie. "A maid for your lonely ranch. Quiet, won't give no trouble. Good for keeping a chair warm, and not much else." A wave of cruel laughter rippled through the onlookers. The price he named was a pittance, an insult designed to underscore her perceived worthlessness and Jedediah's desperation. Jedediah Thorne looked past the jeering faces, past the smirking cruelty of Blackwood. His gaze settled on the woman in the chair. He saw the tremor in the line of her still shoulders, the way her hands, though motionless in her lap, were clenched so tightly the knuckles shone white. He leaned closer, his own weathered face earnest. "Me," he said, his voice quiet, a stark contrast to the surrounding cacophony. She did not look up, but he thought he saw a flicker beneath her lowered eyelids, not of fear alone, but of a spirit caged, a fire banked low but not extinguished. In her stillness, in the palpable weight of her unseen suffering, he recognized a mirror of his own. He knew what it was to be judged, to be broken, to be alone. Straightening, he met Blackwood's gaze. "I'll take her," he said, his voice steady. He counted out the coins, the metallic clink loud in the sudden hush. Then, as Blackwood reached for the money with a triumphant sneer, Jedediah added, "And I'll need Preacher Theron. We're to be married." A stunned silence fell, broken only by a choked gasp from one of the Gleasons. Blackwood's jaw dropped. "Marry her? The broken woman?" The joke had curdled, twisted into something he hadn't intended. Preacher Theron, a nervous man more accustomed to eulogies than weddings in Perdition, was reluctantly summoned. His words were hesitant, swallowed by the oppressive disbelief of the crowd. Jedediah stood tall, his hand resting gently on the back of Ilara's chair. His vows were simple, spoken into the silence of her downcast face. "I, Jedediah, take thee, Ilara," he promised, "shelter, protection." She remained silent, a statue of sorrow. When it was done, a few townsfolk sniggered, others just stared, bewildered. Jedediah ignored them all. He had made a vow, not to the mockery of men, but to the sliver of light he'd seen in a woman's shadowed eyes. He had bought a life, and in the same breath, bound his own to it. The cruel joke was on Perdition, though they didn't know it yet. For Jedediah Thorne, it was an act of solitary defiance, a desperate gamble on a shared salvation. The journey back to the ranch was a slow, arduous passage across a landscape that seemed to hold its breath. Jedediah lifted Ilara from the crude chair, her body unnervingly limp yet possessing a hidden weight, and settled her carefully onto a bed of sacks in the wagon. The sun beat down, merciless, and the dust rose in choking clouds with every turn of the wheels. He drove the weary horses with a gentle hand, his eyes often straying to the still form beside him. The wind whispered secrets through the tall, dry grasses, secrets of hardship and endurance, and Jedediah felt them resonate deep within his bones. His ranch, when they finally reached it, was a stark silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, a small, lonely cabin, a dilapidated barn, and fences that sagged like weary shoulders. It was a place of struggle, yet now, with Ilara's silent presence, it felt different, imbued with a fragile, uncertain purpose. He carried her into the cabin, the scent of old wood smoke and dust greeting them. The interior was sparse, almost painfully so, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth cold and empty, and a single cot in the corner. He laid her gently on his own cot, pulling the cleanest blanket over her. "This is your home now, Elara," he said, his voice soft, the words absorbed by the thick silence of the room. "You're safe here." He did not expect a reply, and none came. He moved about the small space, lighting a fire in the hearth, its nascent glow pushing back the encroaching darkness, bringing a flicker of life to her pale, still face. He prepared a simple meal of beans and dried meat, placing a small portion on a tin plate beside her. She did not move, did not acknowledge it. The silence in the cabin was profound, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the mournful sigh of the wind outside. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions, with the weight of her past and the uncertainty of their future. Days bled into weeks, each one a repetition of the last. Jedediah rose before dawn, tending to his meager livestock, mending fences, coaxing life from the stubborn earth. He moved with a quiet diligence, his face set in lines of ingrained worry, yet his hands when he tended to Elara were surprisingly gentle. He fed her, bathed her brow when the heat was oppressive, and adjusted her position on the cot he had carefully padded with an old quilt to prevent sores. He spoke to her often, not in a demanding way, but as one might speak to the quiet landscape itself, of the weather, of a hawk circling overhead, of a stubborn calf that refused to be weaned. He filled the silence with the mundane rhythm of his life, never pressing her for a response, never betraying impatience. He took the crude chair she had arrived in and, with careful hands, smoothed its rough edges, reinforced its legs, and added a cushion fashioned from an old grain sack stuffed with dried grasses, making it a more comfortable place for her to sit by the window during the day. Elara watched him. From beneath her lowered lashes, her eyes, dark pools of ancient pain, followed his movements. She had been a prisoner of her own body, and of others' cruelty, for so long that trust was a forgotten language. Her paralysis, born from a brutal fall and nurtured by unspeakable trauma, was her armor, her silence a shield. She could move her head, her hands possessed a faint, trembling mobility, but her legs were leaden, unresponsive, her voice a ghost trapped in her throat. Yet, in Jedediah's unwavering, undemanding care, in the sadness she recognized in his own eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift began. He asked nothing of her, yet gave what little he had. One afternoon, he returned from the creek bed with a single, resilient prairie wildflower, its purple petals a stark splash of color against the drabness of the cabin. He placed it in a chipped cup of water beside her chair. Her fingers, resting in her lap, twitched almost imperceptibly towards it. Later, as dusk settled and he sat by the fire, reading aloud from a battered copy of Shakespeare someone had left behind in perdition years ago, his voice a low rumble, she found her gaze lingering on his face, on the way the firelight softened the harsh lines of his exhaustion, for a moment longer than before. A silent house, yes, but no longer entirely empty of a fragile, nascent hope. A fragile peace had settled over the Thorn Ranch, woven from routine and unspoken understanding. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Elara would spend her days in the modified chair by the window, the prairie wildflower, carefully tended by Jedediah, still blooming stubbornly in its cup. The vast expanse outside, once a symbol of her confinement, began to whisper of possibilities, of horizons she had not dared to dream of. Then, the peace shattered like sun-baked earth under a careless boot. Silas Blackwood and the Gleason brothers, their malice festering from the perceived slight of Jedediah's unexpected marriage, rode out to the ranch one searing afternoon. Their arrival was heralded by coarse laughter and the pounding of hooves, a stark violation of the quiet Jedediah and Elara had cultivated. "Thorn!" Blackwood bellowed, his voice dripping contempt. "Just came to see how the loving couple is faring. Still got your silent partner, have you?" He dismounted, swaggering towards the cabin, his cronies fanning out behind him, their eyes cold and predatory. Jedediah emerged from the barn, a pitchfork still in his hand, its tines glinting in the harsh sunlight. He moved without haste, placing himself between the riders and the cabin door. "She's my wife," he stated, his voice low but carrying a new timbre of steel. "This is my land." State your business or leave. His eyes were steady, unwavering, and though his hand was nowhere near the old rifle prop just inside the doorway, the set of his jaw was a warning in itself. Blackwood smirked. Business? Just a friendly visit. Wanted to see if she's learned any new tricks. Or if you've tired of your purchase. He craned his neck, trying to peer through the open doorway at Ilara, who sat frozen in her chair, her face a pale oval in the dim interior. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in Ilara's stomach, but beneath it, something else stirred, a hot, unfamiliar surge of anger. These men, her tormentors, now threatened the one person who had shown her kindness, the sanctuary he had built. She ain't a purchase, Blackwood, Jedediah said, his voice dropping further, each word a carefully weighed stone. She's Mrs. Thorne. The Gleason brothers shifted uneasily at the quiet intensity in Jedediah's tone, but Blackwood only sneered. Mrs. Thorne? A man who marries damaged goods like that, well, folks in Perdition are saying you ain't right in the head, Thorne. Sayings maybe this ranch needs a stronger hand, someone who knows the value of things. The threat was clear, hanging heavy in the air like the promise of a storm. They were probing, testing for the breaking point. After a long, tense moment, Blackwood shrugged, a dismissive gesture. Just friendly concern, Thorne. Friendly concern. He mounted his horse, his eyes lingering on the cabin with a look that promised this was not over. They rode away, leaving a pall of dread behind them, their laughter echoing mockingly across the prairie. The silence they left was heavier, more ominous than before. Jedediah watched them go, his shoulders rigid. When they were out of sight, he turned and went into the cabin. He checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded. He examined the door, the shutters, reinforcing a loose hinge here, a weak latch there. Later that evening, as the shadows lengthened, he sat beside Ilara. He took her hand, the one that had a little more movement, and gently traced letters on her palm. He began to devise a simple tap code, 1 tap for yes, 2 for no, 3 for danger. Her eyes, wide and attentive, followed his every move. He saw not just fear in them now, but a dawning resolve. When he finished explaining, he tapped her palm once. Understand? A hesitant moment, then a faint but distinct tap answered his. 1 tap. Yes. A tiny ember of defiance, fanned by his unwavering protection, began to glow within Ilara. She practiced the code, her taps growing surer, a silent conversation passing between them, a fragile alliance forged against the encroaching darkness. The sky had been a bruised, unsettling yellow all day, the air thick and heavy, pressing down like a physical weight. As evening approached, the wind began to keen, a low, mournful sound that escalated into a furious howl. Dust devils danced across the parched fields, harbingers of the storm that was about to break. Jedediah had been out since noon, working frantically to secure what little he had, reinforcing the leaky roof of the small barn, trying to round up a few spooked chickens that had scattered, checking the already mended fences one last time. The wind tore at his clothes, stinging his eyes with grit. A lone, ancient cottonwood at the edge of his property thrashed wildly, its branches groaning in protest. Ilara watched from her chair by the cabin window, her knuckles white where she gripped its wooden arms. Each gust that rattled the small building sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. The storm hit with the fury of a cornered beast. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, turning the dusty yard into a quagmire. Thunder cracked overhead, so close the cabin seemed to shake on its foundations. Jedediah was trying to secure a loose shutter on the barn when a large branch, torn from the tormented cottonwood by a savage gust, crashed down. He threw himself aside, but not quickly enough. A searing pain shot through his left leg as a smaller, jagged piece of wood struck him, tearing through his trousers and flesh. Gritting his teeth against the agony, he managed to pull himself free, his vision blurring. He had to get back to the cabin, to Ilara. The journey across the small yard felt like miles, each step an excruciating torment. He stumbled, fell, dragged himself through the mud and driving rain, the wind trying to rip him away. Ilara saw him fall. A small, choked gasp, the first sound to escape her lips in years, was lost in the roar of the tempest. He was hurt, badly. He reached the cabin door, fumbled with the latch, and practically fell inside, collapsing onto the rough floorboards, his face pale and contorted with pain, his leg bleeding freely. In that instant, something within Ilara snapped. The terror that had imprisoned her for so long was eclipsed by a more potent, desperate fear for him. Jedediah, who had been her shield, her solace, was now vulnerable, and she was the only one there. With a surge of adrenaline born of sheer will, she pushed against the confines of her chair. A searing pain shot through her own dormant limbs, a protest from muscles long unused. She cried out, a raw, ragged sound, and then, with a monumental effort that tore another cry from her, she thrust herself forward, tumbling from the chair to the floor. Ignoring the agony, she began to drag herself across the rough planks towards him, her arms straining, her useless legs trailing behind. It was an inch-by-inch battle, a testament to a spirit refusing to be broken. She reached him, her breath coming in harsh sobs. Her trembling hand touched his cheek. "Jed," she whispered, her voice a dry, hoarse rasp, unfamiliar even to her own ears. "Hurt?" Jedediah, through a haze of pain, looked up. He saw her there, on the floor beside him, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. He saw the raw scrapes on her arms, the agony in her expression, and the sheer, unyielding determination. "Ilara," he breathed, astonishment momentarily overriding his pain. You moved. You spoke." A profound emotion, a wave of awe and gratitude, washed over him. At that very moment, as if summoned by the chaos, a thunderous banging erupted at the door, heavier than any gust of wind. "Thorn!" Blackwood's voice, amplified by the storm, snarled through the wood. "We know you're in there. And your broken toy. The storm's good cover for a reckoning." The fragile wood of the door shuddered under a heavy impact. The fight for their lives had truly begun. The cabin door splintered inward with a sickening crack, revealing the snarling face of Silas Blackwood, flanked by the two hulking Gleason brothers. Rain and wind surged into the small room, extinguishing the lamp and plunging them into near darkness, lit only by flashes of lightning. Well, Blackwood sneered, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. "Looks like the storm's already done some of our work." He saw Jedediah on the floor, struggling to rise, his injured leg leaving a dark stain on the wood. He saw Ilara, a crumpled figure near the hearth. Jedediah, fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline, pushed himself up against the wall, his hand instinctively going to the hunting knife at his belt. "Get out, Blackwood," he growled, his voice tight with pain and fury. "This is your last chance." As the Gleasons advanced, Ilara, lying on the floor, saw a heavy iron poker resting by the hearth, just within her reach. Her mind, sharpened by years of silent observation and the immediate, terrifying threat to Jedediah, worked with lightning speed. With a grunt of effort that sent jolts of fire through her partially reawakened limbs, she stretched, her fingers closing around the cold metal. As the larger Gleason lunged towards Jedediah, who was parrying a blow from Blackwood, Ilara swung the poker with all her might. It wasn't a strong blow, nor perfectly aimed, but it connected with the back of Gleason's knee. He roared in pain and surprise, his leg buckling, his attack faltering. That split second was all Jedediah needed. He sidestepped Gleason's clumsy recovery and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him crashing into the smaller Gleason brother. Then, from Ilara, came a sound no one in Perdition would have believed possible, a scream, not of terror, but of pure, unadulterated rage, a wild, primal cry that echoed the storm's fury and momentarily froze even Blackwood. The fight became a brutal, close-quarters melee. Jedediah, though hampered by his leg, fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, using his knowledge of the small cabin to his advantage, his knife a silver dart in the dim light. He was no longer just fighting for his land, or his life, but for Ilara, for the fragile hope she represented. Blackwood, arrogant and cruel, had underestimated them both, seeing only a crippled rancher and a broken woman. He hadn't counted on the strength forged in shared suffering, the desperate courage of two souls with nothing left to lose but each other. Just as Blackwood lunged for Jedediah with a length of heavy chain, the splintered doorway was filled by a new figure, Marshal Eli Vance, his Colt peacemaker steady in his hand, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Blackwood," Vance's voice cut through the din, calm and authoritative. Looks like your luck's finally run out. Heard you were causing trouble out this way. Vance, a rare man of principle, had indeed been tracking rumors of Blackwood's increasingly brazen thuggery, and a quiet word from Jedediah weeks earlier about potential trouble had put the Thorn Ranch on his list of places to check during the storm. The remaining Gleason, seeing the marshal, lost his nerve and bolted out into the tempest. Blackwood, trapped and outmaneuvered, slowly lowered his chain. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having scrubbed the sky to a pale, washed blue. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and bruised sage. Inside the battered cabin, a fragile quiet reigned. Jedediah, his leg roughly bandaged, sat slumped against the wall, utterly spent. Elara lay near him, her breathing shallow but steady. Marshal Vance had taken Blackwood and the captured Gleason away hours ago, promising justice. Jedediah reached out a trembling hand, and Elara's found his, her fingers, surprisingly strong, gripping his tightly. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her face was bruised, her hair matted with mud and sweat, but her eyes, meeting his, were alive, alight with a fierce, quiet triumph. "We did it, Elara," he whispered, his voice hoarse. A small, exhausted smile touched her lips, and she nodded, a single, profound affirmation. Spring arrived a year later, painting the mended Thorn Ranch in hues of vibrant green and delicate wildflower pink. The scars on the land, like the scars on its inhabitants, were healing. Elara sat in a sturdy, well-made chair with cleverly designed wheels that Jedediah had painstakingly crafted for her. A ledger lay open on her lap, her sharp mind, once hidden, now managed the ranch's modest but growing accounts. Her voice, though soft, was clear and steady as she directed the two new hired hands Jedediah had finally been able to afford. Her legs remained largely unresponsive, a permanent reminder of her past, but she moved with a newfound purpose and grace around the cabin and the wide porch Jedediah had built and ramped for her. Their evenings were filled with the quiet companionship of shared work, of passages read aloud from books Marshal Vance brought on his occasional visits, and sometimes, a sound that had been absent for too long from both their lives, laughter. The townsfolk of Perdition mostly kept their distance, their mockery muted by a grudging respect, or perhaps fear, of the quiet rancher and his resilient wife. Jedediah Thorn often found himself simply watching Elara, her spirit now unchained, her eyes bright with intelligence and an unshakable love. He had sought simple help and found redemption. The cruel joke Perdition had played had, by some miracle of human spirit, become a sacred vow, a testament to a love forged in the crucible of hardship, a love that saw worth where others saw only brokenness, a love that had, against all odds, bloomed in the desert. If this story of unexpected strength found in the deepest wells of despair, of love's power to heal and transform, stirred something in your soul, if you believe that even the most damaged among us can find their voice and their victory, and that true partnership can turn a cruel jest into a triumphant life, then you're in the right place. Subscribe for more tales of resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of the human heart.